Welcome to another episode of Game Changers for Government Contractors. If you are new to the podcast, let me first welcome you and thank you for listening to the podcast. If you love it, I would love for you to go on whatever platform you're on and do a quick review, give it a 5-star review, that sort of thing, because that really helps the podcast get out there. If you're also new, I would love to connect with you. So reach out to us on LinkedIn, drop us a note, say you just listened to your first episode, what you liked, what you didn't like, other episodes that you would like us to record, that sort of thing. But we would love to connect with you. So go jump on LinkedIn and connect with us there. So let me jump into this episode. I'm kind of continuing a little bit of a series that I've been doing on leadership. I did one a couple of episodes ago, like episode 347 was on a leadership topic. Today, I'm going to be talking about another leadership topic. And this is an interesting one. I won't say a fun one, but it's an interesting one where I find that leaders often get this bright, shiny object syndrome. And let me talk about that. So, the bright, shiny object syndrome is where they move from one thing to another. And they're doing it because they either get bored, confused, hit a roadblock, somebody gives them a bright idea, and all of a sudden there's this bright, shiny object, and now that's the thing they're chasing. A really good example of this is they just went to a conference or a workshop and they were trained on something. They're like, you know what? I'm going to go back to the office and we're going to rewrite our entire sales process based on this new thing. Or they're at a conference and they meet somebody and they're like, oh, we're going to hire this coach, this consultant, this law firm, this accounting firm, and we're going to totally redo our QuickBooks. We're going to totally redo our contracts. We're going to totally redo whatever because somebody gave them this bright, shiny object. And now that's going to be the focus of their life for the next few months. And so why do leaders or why are leaders prone to this bright, shiny object syndrome? Well, there's a couple of reasons. There's pressure to innovate. There's goals that we're trying to accomplish. There's the whole fear of missing out where they're like, well, what if we didn't implement this and now we're losing sales or whatever it may be? There's a lot of reasons. One of them I mentioned earlier was you just get bored and you're going through the business and all of a sudden you're like, man, I'm just bored with our sales process. Let me go Google a workshop. You go attend the workshop. You're like, okay, now this is what we're going to do. Or you get bored with your marketing or your website and go, you know what? We need a new website. That's what we've been lacking. We need a brand new website. And that'll fix everything. And you go and you start hiring a company and you go through getting a new website. Now you're consumed by that. Or, you know what? Our capability statement, that's the problem. That's what's wrong. That's why we're not hitting our goals. And you go hire somebody to do the capability statement. And now you're engulfed in doing the capability statement. And so there's a lot of reasons why it happens. But let me explain the main consequence. The main consequence is usually that you're almost always starting over. You're starting from scratch on something. So let me use the pipeline example. Let's say you have a pipeline and there's 7 steps to it. And you went to a workshop and they're like, oh, that's your problem. You don't have these 6 steps. So now you need 13 steps in your sales process. Okay, well, maybe. And so you redesign it and you're like, you need to call this one something different. And this needs to happen here. Move this to the left, move that to the right. And now you've created an entirely new sales process. So what's the problem with that? The problem with that is you didn't identify what was not working in the last one. You just moved on to the new thing. So you're starting over from scratch with no data. And every time you start over from scratch with no data, you really are starting over from scratch. You're not just going to see a massive improvement because the odds are the reason that your sales process wasn't working is that only 1 or 2 of the steps were broken. And what you needed to do was identify where the broken piece was and fix it, not start from scratch. And so that's a consequence that you have. Another one happens all the time with employees. I'll have people ring me up and say, hey, we just can't get good employees. And we're constantly hiring and firing, hiring, firing, hiring, firing. And my first question is always, have you taken a look at your process for hiring? And it's usually a deer in the headlights moment where they're like, what do you mean? Why would we do that? Like, well, because there's likely something wrong with your process, not with the people you're hiring. Now, You could be hiring the wrong people because in your process, you're not identifying the right people, you're not marketing to the right people. And then you could have a problem, which is the second question I ask. What's your onboarding process? You could have a problem with your onboarding process where you're taking a really good candidate, and in the first 90 days of them being on board, you're not giving them the tools and resources to become successful in your business. So your problem could be you're recruiting the wrong people. The problem could be you're ruining the right people. And we need to figure that out before we change everything about your recruiting. See what I'm saying there? So if you start from scratch all the time, you're missing out on the data that really is the decision points that you need to use in order to become a better organization. So I recommend you implement a decision-making framework that will help slow down this bright, shiny object jumping around that people often do. So here's kind of what I would look at as a framework. So if you went to a conference or a course or something, and you got a great idea, I would not just come home from the conference and start implementing. I would stay the course on what you've already committed to, unless what you're looking at is a complete 180 because you've identified that there's multiple things wrong in the thing you're doing. Occasionally you can do that, but most of the time that's just not the case. Most of the time, if you go to a conference and get a new idea or you hire a company, the odds are there's only minimal things that need to change in order for you to have explosive growth. Now, let me also say this. If you go to a conference and you're already working with a coach or a consultant, don't just go hire the next one at the conference because they have a great deal. Go back and talk to your coach. Go back and talk to your consultant. Say, hey, we met Mike at this conference. He's got some really great ideas that would help us in sales. How's that different than what we're already doing with you? Like, go back to the people you're already working with so you're not starting from scratch, because maybe there's some insight you could pass on to the person you're already working with and you could make the leap with them. And they have all that knowledge from working with you that's going to allow you guys to leapfrog where you are much faster than bringing in the new consultant. So that's why we stay the course on what we're already working with. The next thing here is we pause and actually reflect on what we're currently doing and see if it makes sense. Just pause and say, hey, does what we're doing actually make sense? But we just need to make some tweaks. If it doesn't make sense, we'll make a change. But if it makes sense what we're doing, but we just we need to tweak some stuff, let's look at that first. So we stay the course, we pause and reflect. The next thing we do is we start asking questions. And here's some questions. So why are we being romanced by this new thing? Why is this attractive? Is it because we think, that will allow us to leapfrog in time? Is it because it looks easier? Is it because it was just a sales pitch that sounded really well? Like, what is it that's romancing us to make us want to make the change? And then another question I would ask is, can you wait to implement the new thing until after the current thing is done? Because oftentimes we'll cut off a project we're working on to start a new project when what we need to do is finish the old project. But the old project's not as sexy as the new one. It's not as bright and shiny and pretty. So we're like, hey, let's just put that in the parking lot and we'll start on this new thing. And if you go back to what I said earlier about you're always starting from scratch, we're starting from scratch on the new thing. And now you get 3-4 months into the new thing, and now that becomes the old thing, and you find a new bright, shiny object, and you put that in the parking lot, and you have a never-ending cycle of all of this unfinished work and bright, shiny objects that are all become dull, and you're not completing anything. And I see this happen in business all the time. So make sure if you can finish in implementing the thing you're implementing, you do that before you move on. Now, one of the last steps here in this decision-making framework is to talk with your team. Talk with your coach about the concept before jumping off the cliff. If you can do that and work through things, whether it's your team or your coach, they can often say, well, it does make sense for us to pause what we're doing on this project because this is fixing a bigger hole in the company. And they may say, sir, I think we need to stay the course. And here's 6 reasons why if we implement this new thing you're talking about, it's going to break everything we currently have. And so now you've got that insight from the team And you can go back to the team and say, so based on your recommendations, how do we quickly implement the thing we're already working on and get that out the door? What suggestions do you have to make changes to that so that it's better? And then should we implement the new thing? If so, how do we do that? When do we do that? And you can incorporate them in the decision-making process and cycle so that they can feel more empowered. And there's a lot of things that your team is going to tell you that you don't realize. So don't be romanced by all the bright, shiny objects. Occasionally, there is one that's worth stopping everything for and implementing, but that is really, really rare in business. So stop doing that. Put a decision-making framework in place to evaluate new ideas and understand when things just need to stay in the parking lot. If you're not familiar with that concept, it's where you put an idea in a virtual parking lot to come back to it later. You're like, hey, we're going to park that over here. We're going to put it on the whiteboard. It's something we're going to review at the next quarter's meeting or at the end of the year meeting or our quarterly annual planning. We're going to review that, but we're going to put that in the parking lot so we stay focused on the things we've committed to. And if you do this, I guarantee you will complete more projects. You will tweak more things that you're already doing and get a better benefit because you're making the things you're already doing better and you have all that knowledge. And your team will be much more appreciative because you're not stopping and starting projects and all that kind of stuff. So, as always, if you have questions about this episode, please reach out. If you are new or a big fan of the podcast and you love this episode, please hop on whatever platform you're listening to. Give us a thumbs up, 5 stars, a quick review, whatever it is your platform wants, and help us get this show out to the masses. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next episode.